Nigeria's oil revenue continues to fall due to never-ending attacks from the oil-rich Niger Delta. But with the discovery of oil in states other than Niger Delta, what is the fate of Niger Delta agitators?
As the House resumed plenary 5 weeks after it went on recess, one of the issues tabled before the lawmakers was oil exploration in Lagos.
Communities and the environment has been enormous and very worrisome. The local indigenous people have seen little or no improvements in their standard of living, while suffering serious damage to their natural environment. So to this extent, we wouldn't want our great state, Lagos State, to be in a situation where we would have to be looking for post-remedial situations of how to deal with this.
The discovery and exploration of oil in Lagos State is cheering news received by many, but certain concerns have been raised on oil-bearing communities. The lawmakers are particularly worried about the livelihood of residents in the communities, an issue which brings to mind the Niger Delta experience.
Thank God the oil has been discovered. I want to support the position has been canvassed by my honorable colleague, because as been said, we don't want to see a repeat of what happened in the Niger Delta.
We are talking about what is the developmental plan of the investors. It's not just for Lagos State to say, or for us to just say, okay, we want 13% derivation. We start looking at the socio-economic and environmental implication of the activities.
I quite agree with all of you that need for us to be proactive, to put in place necessary structure that will protect the interests of the host community. The host community should also be seen as a stakeholder in this project. And we should also realize the fact that the control over oil and gas is in the hands of the federal government. Notwithstanding, we must continue to do what is necessary to protect our society.
The House resolved to call a stakeholders meeting where the exploration company, the communities and state officials would meet to discuss the issues raised. Abimbola Agbebi, TVC News, Lagos.
All right, we're joined now by public affairs analyst Bove Imabel Pago. Is joining us from Port Harcourt in our studio in there. Bove, it's good to have you join us. Good morning. Now, let's start it this way.
Good morning to
you. Thank you. Now, when it comes to oil revenue, we know that that's the mass where Nigeria gets all its wealth from, as the case may be. But recently, things have turned the other way and Nigerians are complaining. Right now, when you sit down and you look at Niger Delta, you are there, you look at Niger Delta, you see what Nigeria has to boast for and brag around the world for. What really comes to your mind when you hear of agitations and when you hear of oil revenues dwindling and all of that? What really goes through your mind? Give us a picture.
Okay, thank you. It's apt for Nigerians to understand the situation that has led to the phase that we are in the country in terms of dwindling oil production. You will need to look at it in different phases or strata, because there are different interplays that are responsible for the situation we are in. First, we should look at the interplays at the international level, where OPEC sits to decide the production rate per country, that is for its member countries. And they also set the price, the oil pricing system for the countries that are selling oil internationally. These are critical things that affect oil production in every country of the world. Now, secondly, in the past 2 years, Nigeria has lost some of its critical markets in terms of oil. The U.S. no longer buys oil from Nigeria as it was the case in the past. And so you wouldn't be producing so much when your market is dwindling. We only have people like China and also India who have been our major buyers in the past few years. You know, that is at the international level. Now, when you come back home to Nigeria, there are different factors that are responsible from our government in the country. And we can look at it at the political level, likewise the socioeconomic levels. When I talk about the political level, you will know that the federal government is exclusively in charge of oil sales through its parastatal, the NNPC.
All right.
The NNPC coordinates oil production for Nigeria, and we have had a lot of challenges, you know, with NNPC running oil production in Nigeria, one of which is the distribution of the blocks and the functionality of the blocks. We do not know from their reports which one is functioning.
Okay,
recently a report was released which indicted the NPDC, which is a subsidiary of the NNPC, of not remitting its actual sales to the country. Neither do they disclose the actual amount of crude that they produce. So these are some factors at the national level that we have to contend with.
All right, we'll go into that, the indictment and perhaps the collaboration of some public officials as we go along. But you're also aware that most of the cargoes we actually even have at the seaport are not even moving because Nigerians at the point wasn't able to meet deadlines from buyers. Some countries have to stop buying from Nigeria because Nigeria was not able to meet the deadlines when it comes to production. If you're going to give them some barrels of oil per day because of the issues going on in the Niger Delta, that was a problem. Do you have a solution to that?
You know, why would they be able to be serviced sufficiently when we have moribund refineries that are not properly maintained? This is part of the political situation that I was describing previously. You know, if our refineries are properly maintained and politics is removed from the maintenance or running or management of these facilities, Nigeria will be in its glorious days of oil production again. Additionally, you will see a situation where the security situation in terms of our marine waterways is quite deplorable. A lot of issues arising every day, and the security forces, which is also the representative of the federal government, are unable to handle this situation. And so even if vessels come into the waterways, they are coming with a lot of fear. However, a situation where there is continual production, that is, production is unabated or not truncated because of security situations, is anticipated as a key driving force for Nigeria to regain its glorious days in oil production once again. The situation you can get through this is ensuring that our refineries, and indeed the management of these refineries, come to realize that the economy of this nation sits on the proper management of these huge facilities for the nation. Now, if they are producing sufficiently and they are evacuating sufficiently, I am sure that Nigeria will regain all its place in terms of production, in terms of distribution, international level. And even when price is dwindling, you wouldn't feel so much the effect of the dwindling prices, given that we will be able to have had massive sales that can cater for the dwindling prices of oil. However, government at the center have paid lip service to the sustenance of effectively managed refineries in the country. Even if you discover oil in virtually every state of the nation, and the situation remains what it is today, we wouldn't be counting any further gains, as it won't bring any value. So the discovery of oil in Lagos, as commendable as it is, should be part of the general plan to overhauling the oil and gas sector in the country. in terms of ensuring that there is a peaceful and workable environment for that sector in Lagos State. It wouldn't be wise to have refineries where within few months hoodlums will take over the place, and challenges that are being faced back here in the Niger Delta will again be played out in other parts of the country. Same applies to the Lake Chad Basin, where oil prospect is going on at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike.
All right, Bove, you mentioned Lagos, and this brings me to the issue of Lagos now discovering oil, and in very large quantity. Besides that, we are also aware that Dangote refineries will soon be upstream in Lagos. Now, what's the feeling in the Niger Delta where you are that the attention, so to say, is going to shift a little from the Port Harcourt refinery, the Warri refinery, the two refineries in Port Harcourt, and then the exploration to somewhere in Lagos outside the Niger Delta?
You know, I do not belong to the class that will continually politicize issues of oil sales or oil production in the country. The federal government has an exclusive right over all of these. What we in the Niger Delta expect is that the facilities here will be put in proper shape. There isn't a competition between Lagos and the Niger Delta. If we put it that way, it will sound like we are beginning to bicker and to differ on the prospects of continual oil production in the Niger Delta. As it is presently, the Niger Delta remains the greatest producer of oil, and it will continue to be that way because production has not also commenced in Lagos. And additionally, let us look at the involvement of communities, even in Lagos. The Niger Delta is at the forefront of calling for community engagement, which has not been addressed. You will understand that the bill in the National Assembly is yet to be passed, and we have had different phases of that bill presented to the Nigerian populace. We do not know the actual direction, because whether in Lagos or in the Lake Chad Basin, this bill is going to apply to the entire country. And so if it is politicized because you want to deny the people of the Niger Delta the value of the oil that they produce or their right over some of the royalties from the oil, you're equally going to deny yourself in Lagos and in the Lake Chad Basin the same rights over oil production. And so the contestations over production and distribution or resource control will also emerge in those areas of the country. So it is only up for the federal government to begin to put in place mechanisms that will address this as a proactive measure to quelling futuristic crises in any part of the country that may be involved in oil production. It is our fervent prayer that people in other parts of the country will also become part of the producing communities, so they will feel the pains that we feel when issues arise and they are not properly addressed. These are the minds of the Niger Deltans who over time did not just face deprivation, but have been made to face the harsh conditions of a situation that is supposed to be a glorious situation, not just for them, but for the entire Nigerian nation. Today, Angola is presiding over oil production in Africa because of the neglect by the federal government. The Niger Delta Avengers and other groups in the Niger Delta, which we are taking as child's play, have begun to show the impact of their protests. And the economy is dwindling because these activities are on the increase. What level of interface have the federal government done? If we are unable to handle our own problems internally, the other day the president was at the UN and he was making an appeal for world leaders to intervene in the situations in Nigeria. And I mean the situation in the Niger Delta. These are part of the things that we should set up internal mechanisms to ensuring that this situation is brought under control. It has been a perennial situation, and these are the minds of the Niger Deltans who over time did not just face deprivation, but have been made to face the harsh conditions of a situation that is supposed to be a glorious situation, not just for them, but for the entire Nigerian nation. Today, Angola is presiding over oil production in Africa because of the neglect by the federal government. the Niger Delta Avengers and other groups in the Niger Delta, which were taken as child's play, have begun to show the impact of their protests. And the economy is dwindling because these activities are on the increase. What level of interface have the federal government done? If we are unable to handle our own problems internally. The other day, the president was at the UN and he was making an appeal for world leaders to intervene in the situations in Nigeria. And I mean the situation in the Niger Delta. These are part of the things that we should set up internal mechanisms to ensuring that this situation is brought under control. It has been a perennial situation, and we understand that with the force of the federal government, not only military force, but in terms of understanding the dynamics of the Nigerian situation, they can handle this situation even before inviting foreigners to join up. Now, I know that the president has good intentions for the country, but he should translate that good intention to ensuring that it is better felt by every citizen in the Niger Delta. We are talking of 13% derivation, which is continual. Then the petroleum industry bill is removing the 10% community fund. These are contrasting situations which are telling on the nerves of the people of the Niger Delta. We are talking of our sensibilities. And it is the insensitiveness of the federal government that can this be addressed?
All right,
can this be holistically handled?
Okay.
Such that we will feel some more peace in the Niger Delta.
All right, Bove, we'll come back to you on this. Let's give a background to understanding other perspectives of this. Now, until recently, Nigeria operated a mono economy heavily dependent on oil, which provides the bulk of government revenue and most of the foreign exchange earnings. But a drop in international crude oil prices from 2014 introduced new worries for the country's economy.
Since then, Nigeria has now opened up itself to other opportunities that will yield revenue. The falling price of crude oil is not only the problem that Nigeria has to contend with. Renewed agitation for resource control in the Niger Delta is another major issue, now fueled by the fight against environmental pollution and development for the region. Militants in the region have continued to engage in oil theft and pipeline sabotage, impacting heavily on Nigeria's oil production.
All right, now 80% of Nigeria's crude oil is produced in Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, Rivers, Delta, while the remaining 20% comes from Cross River, Imo, Abia, Ondo, and Anambra states. Now, Nigeria's crude oil exports account for about 90% of foreign exchange earnings and 80% of government revenue, making the country's economy heavily reliant on the petroleum sector.
With the renewed militant activities, however, Nigeria is no longer able to meet its oil production target of 2.2 million barrels of crude oil per day pegged in 2016 budget. It has also reduced crude exports, which fell by over 20% in the second quarter of 2016, with intensified attacks by militants who blew up pipelines and reduced oil output. The decline in oil output has adversely affected government's revenue, expectedly increasing the requirement for borrowing and debt service, affecting the funds available for capital expenditure.
Now, this has also contributed to the state's inability to pay workers' salaries. Insecurity in the region, both onshore and offshore, has also made many investors pull out, while other major oil investors have remained hesitant in investing further in Nigeria's petroleum sector. Let's take a look at oil production in the first half of 2016. Now, in March, Nigeria lost its long-standing position as Africa's top oil producer to Angola when its oil production dropped to 1.677 million barrels per day, compared to Angola's 1.782 million barrels per day production then.
According to the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, the average oil production was about 1.9 million barrels per day in the first quarter of 2016. Oil production dropped by 0.42 million in 2016 as the second quarter to 1.69 million barrels per day from about 2.11 million barrels per day in 2016 as the first quarter of the year. The January-May 2016 output translated to an average daily crude oil output of 1.97 million barrels per day. That's according to data released by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC.
Now, according to the NNPC, Nigeria can produce up to 2.7 million barrels per day. The maximum output Nigeria has experienced over the past 10 years was sometime in mid-2011, and it was just a little above 2.25 million barrels per day. That was when vandalism was at its lowest. Now, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachiku, recently noted that between January and June 2016, more than 1,600 incidents of vandalism was recorded, resulting in a loss of 109 million liters of petroleum products and 560,000 barrels of crude oil to refineries.
According to him, quote, an additional 1.1 million barrel per day is required between now and year end to meet targeted annual production, end of quote. Kachiku said compared to the 2.2 barrels targeted in the budget, the country produces about 1.56 barrel per day. That's the Organization of All Exporting Countries, that's OPEC, in its monthly oil market report for September, indicated that Nigeria's oil output had taken a further dip to 1.46 million barrels per day.
And that's in August. And that was from 1.52 million barrels per day recorded in July. Now, OPEC's report indicated that Angola's oil output rose to 1.775 million barrels per day in August from 1.767 million barrels per day in the previous month. Now, uncertainty surrounding the future direction of oil prices and production level has led to Nigeria adopting a conservative budget for 2017, set around a crude export price of $42.5 a barrel and a production target of 2.2 million barrels per day, the same output level set for 2016. All right, that's a long one there, but how about, Bovi, let me bring you back in here. When it comes to the politics of oil, you said earlier on, certainly you wouldn't want to go into the issue of politics of oil, but if we take it to the international level, we see that the paradigm is shifting. In fact, the paradigm has shifted when it comes to the politics of oil. And if you narrow it down to Nigeria, government is still seem to be holding on to that. And if we see the difference between what Nigeria is doing and maybe what Dubai or Saudi Arabia and some of these Arab, Kuwait and Bahrain and the others are doing, there seems to be too much of government involvement in the issue of oil, and the business of oil is politicized. How can government hands off the business of oil?
You know, first we need to understand that in this country, a lot has gone wrong since independence, because Nigeria's federal government, other than allow for private sector driven initiatives in all the economic spheres of the country, put itself at the forefront. This negates even its principles of existence. Why? We should be able to understand that a private sector-driven economy is a fledgling and very buoyant economy. Government is necessarily expected to play a regulatory role, but not see itself as a businessman or a business institution. And so the difference which you have created gives credence to my earlier postulation that interplays at the international level have a massive effect on us locally in Nigeria. And we need to plan proactively to getting out of this situation. Now, I expected that over 50 years of oil exploration or more will allow Nigeria to become a very mature player at both the international levels and at the national level, in terms of setting standards, in terms of business-like attitudes, in terms of designing mechanisms that will ensure that production is never tampered with, knowing fully well that it is this production that gives life to our economy. Until we are able to understand that the role of the federal government through the institutions such as the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and its subsidiaries are not becoming so valuable anymore. It's not becoming a trend. It's not becoming trendable. Only then we will be able to begin to redesign other initiatives that will enable that sector to thrive.
All right,
and
Bovie,
to meet up with the competitiveness at the international level.
Okay, Bovie, if the federal government were to hands off, like perhaps you're postulating, and the private sector takes over, do you think that will solve the issue of sabotage and vandalism?
You know, there will be different approaches when you are bringing in different players to the scene. Now, even as it were, you can see from the interface by the multinational corporations, such as Shell, such as Chevron, Texaco, etc., in the various platforms they operate, they have different engagement. And that has been largely responsible, apart from the broad contestation in the region, for the continual existence of relationship with the multinational corporations. The federal government do not have the wherewithal in terms of approach and methodology to engaging communities that much.
Is it
because the federal government sees itself as a federal government, as a czar, as an empire. But the business people see themselves as people who are here because you exist for them to sell their oil.
All
and
right.
they are extracting this oil from your very locality, and that makes them your partner. So there needs to be partnership, and federal government should play a lower role. Not that it should hands off completely, but it should play a lower role and take up more regulatory functions than it is doing presently.
Okay, is it because it's easier to cower the private sector, as for perhaps when they don't dance to the tune of the militants there, they can be kidnapped? You can say that for the federal government with the federal mind.
Sorry, I didn't get the word you used previously.
Cower.
What did you say? Is it because
it's easier to intimidate the private sector? Perhaps the issue of kidnapping comes to mind now, when they don't dance to the tune of the militants and agitators.
No, we are not talking about intimidation. We are not talking about intimidation, because intimidation is an extreme situation. We are talking about partnership. And mind us, it is only when there is no partnership that you may begin to find hostility. And so for the multinational corporations that have partnered effectively with its communities, you do not see so much of what you are calling intimidation. What you are calling intimidation, by me, is a request for the acknowledgement of the rights of the community people. Because if you come and take away my resource, I will definitely ask you, on what basis am I going to get some value from the resource that you are going back with? And so if I'm not assured of a value that's going to come back to me, again, both in financial and other forms, I will not be able to allow you to go home with my resource, knowing fully well that you are going to develop your economy. We should also be mindful that the multinational corporations you see send back these monies for the good of their country. Nigeria only exists as a raw material ground for them to remove this raw material and go back home to develop. This is another politics of oil, internationally and also nationally. So our regulations in Nigeria, by way of our laws, should be able to tame these multinational corporations such that their partnership will not result in extreme situations that when people ask for their rights, they are termed as intimidating people who have come to explore business in Nigeria.
All right, Bovie, let me ask you this quick before we go into the news update for the time. We know that we were talking about oil in Lagos and in the Lake Chad region earlier on. What factors should be considered so that the anomalies or the dissatisfaction or the activities that agitators are raising their voices against in the Niger Delta doesn't rear up in those areas in Lagos and in the Lake Chad region, Lake Chad Basin, for instance?
One critical thing will be for government to drive a process that allows the people to understand the actual intent, not the politics that government is playing. This can only be achievable through sustained interface with the communities. It can also be achievable through a total rework of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is still sitting at the National Assembly. If the Petroleum Industry Bill allows for greater community involvement in terms of surveillance, in terms of receipt of royalties, in terms of recognition of roles that they can play, in terms of the ownership of the resources that they have, things will be a lot more glorifying at the Niger Delta or in any part of the country. Mind you, the environments are the same, the colors are the same, but the ethnic sustained interface with the communities. It can also be achievable through a total rework of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is still sitting at the National Assembly. If the Petroleum Industry Bill allows for greater community involvement in terms of surveillance, in terms of receipt of royalties, in terms of recognition of roles that they can play, in terms of the ownership of the resources that they have, things will be a lot more glorifying at the Niger Delta or in any part of the country. Mind you, the environments are the same, the colors are the same, but the ethnicities are different.
All right, Bove.
And we need to understand that what we have condoned here for so much time
Bove,
may not be condoned in other ethnic nationalities.
Yes, Bove, I'm going to allow you land on this point when we come back. All right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and on this segment we've been talking about the implications of the dwindling oil revenue in Nigeria. We have from our Port Harcourt studio, Bove Imabel Pago, we've been talking about this. Now, Bove, thanks for staying there. Now, before we went on break, I was asking you earlier on what factors to consider in order to ensure that what is happening in the Niger Delta doesn't happen in Lagos and in the Lake Chad Basin as oil is discovered in those regions and exploration and production will be started. And you started giving us your point. So can you roll on now?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I actually thought of the review of the Petroleum Industry Bill to making it more community friendly, such that people in Lagos, people in the north, and people down here in the south will have the same feel of the bill. And I asserted that the situations are the same, but the ethnic ingredients and aggravations may be completely different if other ethnic groups face the same, situations that we have faced patiently in the Niger Delta before now that we are now making or embarking on our agitations. The federal government of Nigeria seems to have embarked on a macabre dance, and they have lost focus of what they should do. Imagine that successive sessions of the National Assembly has come to supervise a bill which is now taking like 3 to 4 years in the National Assembly. This also tells you how insensitive we are to the plight of the people of Nigeria, which a constitution tries to address their needs and regulate their lives. Now you will understand that policies of government like the one we are talking about, the bill at the National Assembly, need to reflect the intent of government in terms of addressing welfare issues of its citizenry and in terms of developing the areas that are contributing to national development. It is not only enough to establish a Niger Delta Development Commission, because I am also sure that with the discovery of oil in other parts of the country, there will be new contraptions that will be made to addressing issues of oil exploration or development in those areas. So what are they coming with to the table? Are the people involved? Is there a consultative forum? Is there a consultative process that allows the people to actually bring the very needs that affect them to the table so that the federal government understands their very need and not their perceived needs?
All right.
Secondly, is the federal government looking at reviewing the situation such that the situation of Oloibiri, which is completely milked dry and is a skeletal community today, does not replay in any other part of the country. Now, are we coming up to also support individuals in the oil-bearing communities such that they have greater input in terms of allocation of oil blocks, in terms of participation as vendors, in terms of participation as workers, or any other thing that can bring food to their table? When these are done and communities are looked at holistically and needs are addressed, core needs like water provision, core needs like electricity provision, employment generation, scholarships to our youths, empowerment opportunities to our women, and indeed hospitals for our health concerns, then this can be a turnaround point in terms of oil production and community consultation in Nigeria and their welfare. All right,
Bove, talking about consultation, a lot of consultativeness that's been going on even with the crisis of the Niger Delta Avengers. Now, the federal government had come out several times to say they are splinter groups, that it's even difficult to really identify who is the arrowhead, who really do we engage with, who really do we talk to in terms of consultation and the community. So where you have splinter groups, where you have perhaps division within the community, how will this issue you're talking about be fully addressed?
You know, when you say this to me, and you are the federal government talking to me, you make me laugh at the failure of your institutions. We have a DSS, which presence is felt in the 774 local governments across the states, the federation. And you also have the police, you have the civil defense, and other apparatus of state in terms of security. It tells me that they are not doing their work. Because if they are doing their work, they would embark on sufficient information and intelligence gathering such that their information will be used to quelling situations and not used to correcting situations. We have rather been proactive and preventive other than be corrective in this country. We have found ourselves in the place we are now. We're talking about paradigm shift. There cannot be a paradigm shift when the institutions that will drive the paradigm shift remain largely unable to develop its capacity to meet up with modern day reality. This is a situation that boggles my mind, my imagination, that Nigeria in the post-independent days is unable to utilize its security apparatus to quell situations. Now, the Niger Delta Avengers, they are not ghosts at all. Somebody like the elder Edward Clark, had been up and doing and has been trying to do an interface. There are other key stakeholders in the region. If you start from the Ogoni nationality to the Ijaw nationality and to other ethnic groups in the region, you will know what to do with these people. And that is why I said earlier that the federal government knows the dynamics of this country, but they were paying lip service to most things that have culminated in the situation that I have found myself and my people are yearning for development today. It will be mind-boggling to say that most youths in the Niger Delta go hungry every day. Some people do not have 100 naira to pay for transport from one destination to another. And that is why people have taken it upon themselves to making these agitations this massive. Now, if government have known and understood and worked towards addressing such drastic situations in the Niger Delta, the boys will not have emerged in the first place. Okay. And again, because of their approach in the past, which made them to begin to fetter with some groups with money, splinter groups are springing up because the idea is if Group A can receive money, Group B receive money, then Group C to Z will also receive money when they spring up. So the approach should be different. All right. You cannot kill your people and have your nation. What you can do is to engage your people and demilitarize their conscience, and they will begin to become value to society again.
All right, Bove Imabel Pago, thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast.